Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson and welcome back to the Steven Universe Retrospectives, and today we're going to be discussing episodes 51 and 52 of Steven Universe / the final episodes of Season 1, Full Disclosure and Joyride. And if the last two episodes were where all the big plot threads came together, then these two episodes could be considered breather episodes, the epilogue episodes, aftermath, all that stuff. Essentially, it's just everybody reacting to what happened in the previous two-parter. In this case, Full Disclosure actually opens up immediately where Jailbreak left off, as it immediately opens with Steven and the Gems just on the beach after having witnessed Malachite get dragged into the ocean, and they're just standing amongst the debris of Peridot's ship, with Steven with Steven on the phone with Connie. And pretty much as Connie is calling Steve, and as Steven's on this phone call, Connie's just freaking out and wants to know what's going on. You said something about a giant hand coming to Earth. What's happening? But after everybody just kind of takes a moment to take it all in, well, they all start reacting. In this case, Amethyst starts cheering because, hell yeah, they won, yada yada yada. And Lion, who happened to be there on the beach at the time, Wanda ends up trying to nuzzle up against Steven to try and comfort him, and in the meantime, Steven's trying to tell Connie what happened, but as he's talking, Greg ends up driving up in the van. As such, Steven ends up hanging up on Connie, telling her he'll call her later, and so Steven goes up to Greg, and Greg's happy that Steven's okay, though he can see his shiner still there. So Greg wants to know what's going on. He thinks, well, what? I guess the invaders didn't have anything. I guess the invaders couldn't beat the crystal gems, and Steven ends up telling him, no, they pretty much creamed us. As such, Steven kind of goes on and explains everything about how the homeworld gems came. They were super strong. They beat the crap out of them, and they try to kidnap Steven because they think he's his mom, and that there are probably going to be more out there that want to kill him. And Greg reacts the way anybody else would react if their son told him this. He starts freaking the hell out. As such, Greg says, excuse me, Steven, you know I support you and everything you do, but I gotta go calm down. So he ends up running back to the van, and he immediately starts trying to pull out calming music, which instead he accidentally puts in a CD of death metal. It's hilarious. But as he's freaking out, Steven starts looking concerned and starts thinking, wait, if he's freaking out because of this, what happens if I tell Connie this? And as if on cue, Steven's phone rings, and it's Connie. As such, Steven doesn't really know what to tell Connie, and so rather than picking up the phone immediately, he just starts wandering through Beach City trying to think of the proper way to explain the story to her. Unfortunately, though, when he starts seeing the businesses and the demolition, everything caught in the crossfire from when they crashed the ship, well, he's having trouble thinking of excuses. And the more debris he sees, the more buildings are damaged, the more he starts kind of getting worried, until eventually, as his wanderlust ends up taking him to a cliff that's a little bit out of Beach City and gives him a good view of the city and the beach it's occupied on. As such, as Steven is still thinking about it, guess who shows up but Ronaldo. Yeah, he claims that this spot is his brooding spot, and he pretty much tells Steven about how this is where he comes to ponder on the darkness of the world. He doesn't use those exact words, but pretty much he just talks about how the path they choose to walk on is a dangerous one, but it's one they must walk, and they can't tell anyone or let them into their world lest they be traumatized and so forth, which that part actually does resonate with Steven, because he does tell Ronaldo about how when he talked to his dad freaked out. And Ronaldo, well, he's saying it pretentiously. He says, yes, that's a predictable response. But he says that's such a, like, we must make these sacrifices, that we can't let people get close lest their innocent lives be shattered. It's the price we must pay so that they lead their innocent lives, which, yeah, it's pretentious. It may be a little right, but it's still very much pretentious, and coming from Ronaldo, we know that he's mostly talking about his path or whatever. Although he immediately gets off his high horse when he sees the remains of the ship crashed onto Beach City, and he immediately just stops acting all mysterious and brooding-like as he says he's got to go get a piece of it for his blog. He also did mention that Mayor Dewey said that everyone can go back to the city, so yeah, whatever. However, what he said did seem to resonate with Steven, which actually leads to another song, which I don't know the name of, but it's actually a pretty catchy song that's about singing about how he never really fully understood the ramifications of what he and the Gems did, or what they had to do to keep the fight going, or basically the full implications. And so it's about him kind of coming to terms with it, while also singing about how he might have to distance himself from Connie. It's actually a really good song. Recommend checking it out. If I wish I could remember what it was called. It actually is nice is that it has a nice little guitar music, and Zach Allison has good lyrics to it. And what makes it better is that the ringtone for Connie's number is the chorus of the song, and it works well. But ultimately, how the song pretty much ends with Steven choosing to ignore Connie's phone call. As such, Steven meets back up with the Gems back at the temple, and they're pretty much wondering what they're going to be doing next. But Steven, who's gone into full brood mode, says they have to make sure that no humans get on the beach, lest that they grab any gem tech, because, well, that shit's dangerous and that can't fall in the hands of innocent people. However, because he's in full brood mode and he's trying to distance himself from people, he thinks that they just need to cut everybody off, that they can't let anybody there, they can't let anybody in, they can't let humans in, yada yada yada. Which is hilarious, which I find amusing, is that Pearl and Amethyst are actually for this, and Pearl says that we had a fence once, what if we get a new one with barbed wire? And Amethyst says, hey, we can have a mode, and I could be the crocodile. Which I love. Garnet ends up shooting down both of those ideas, because, as Pearl says, Amethyst says she'll be the crocodile, but she never commits. And two, well, they can't have a fence, because then Steven wouldn't be able to interact with people or his dad, and he kind of needs that. Although Steven says he doesn't need to do it, and he has to be serious and all that, but immediately Connie calling him kind of ruins any mood he was going for. And he talks about how he's trying to distance himself from her because, well, he doesn't want her getting involved in all their business. However, Amethyst says it's going to be a little hard because she's coming right up the steps to his front door. As such, Steven begins freaking out, and as such, Pearl and Garnet end up meeting with Connie at the front door. They end up distracting her enough for Steven to try and sneak out a window, but once that conversation ends and Pearl and Garnet kind of close the door in Connie's face. I mean, they don't just slam it in her face. They just say, "I don't understand your human rituals. Goodbye," and then close the door. Once Connie turns around, she sees Steven after he ran past her, and he's running on the beach. As such, she chases after him, and they run through the ruins of the ship. And Steven manages to hide behind a piece of debris, but Connie is, well, obviously freaking out. And when she loses track of Steven, she tries calling him again. He ends up muting his phone, but she is just clearly worried about Steven. She keeps calling for him, asking, "Why won't you talk to me? Come on, please say something. Is it something I did? Why aren't you picking up?" Pretty much, excuse me, soda. Pretty much, she's just worried about him, and so Steven finally musters up the courage to do something. In this case, he texts her, and he texts her that he doesn't want to be friends anymore. And the face Connie makes when she reads that text is just ouch, because she just looks hurt beyond belief, like someone tore her heart out, which it really does make sense, considering that prior to when Connie met Steven, she was kind of a wallflower and didn't really interact with anyone. So the idea of Steven, her first friend, telling her to pretty much say, go the hell away, yeah, that would hurt like hell. As such, Connie finally calls Steven again, ends up calling Steven again, so Steven finally picks up and says that he can't be friends with her, that he doesn't want to be friends with her. But Connie ain't taking any of that shit. She tells him that if he really doesn't want to be friends with her, he should be man enough to come and say something right to her face. Go and say it to her face, and if he means it, she'll believe it, and she'll just go right back to the person she was before. But she only will do it if it's right to her face. As such, Steven does end up coming out from behind the debris. He keeps his face low so Connie can't see it. He walks right up to her. And when Connie looks him in the eye, he's just bawling and says he still wants to be friends. As such, Connie does realize that he looks hurt, and she does again take note of the shiner he has, and so Steven finally does explain everything that happened with Peridot, Jasper, and so forth. And so while Connie does have trouble kind of taking it all in, at the same time, she is more worried about Steven, because he's the one that went through all this, not her. And while she is a little bit shaken by this, she does say that she does still want to be a part of his world. She wants to still be his friend. And whatever happens, she wants to be there for him. Which I think is really sweet, really nice, and it does well in showcasing that their friendship is still strong, and overall just does well in further bringing her into the world. And as such, the episode ends with Greg driving up as he's finally managed to get some calming music and he's back to himself. He's all good. He's all good. He's managed to take it all in. And he even offers to drive Connie home. And so the episode ends with them driving out of Beach City to bring Connie home as everybody is going back to Beach City to get back to work, get back to their businesses, just pretty much get back to their normal lives. So, everything's hunky-dory, I guess. I think. I don't know. But that's where the episode ends. But which leads us into Joyride, as in the beginning of Joyride, Steven and the Gems are doing what Steven suggested in the last episode, and gathering the pieces of Peridot's ship, because, well, this is Gem tech. It's highly advanced alien technology, and it's probably a good idea to not let anybody get their hands on it, because, well, it's like Steven said, if it falls into the hands of humans, they could easily hurt themselves, and this stuff is very dangerous. Even a single piece could ultimately come back to bite them in the ass. As such, they have to gather as many pieces as they can, big or small. So that's what they're doing. However, as Steven is gathering these pieces of the spaceship, the cool kids end up coming up to Steven, in this case, Buck, Sour Cream, and Jenny, and they pretty much just want to hang out with Steven. Steven says he can't do it because he's in the middle of work, which they understand, but Steven promises that he'll hang out with them later. After Steven and the Gems are done picking everything up, with Steven, well, not really done, but at least gotten what they could done for that day, and Steven is sore lying in bed, Sour Cream and Buck end up knocking on Steven's door, or in this case, throwing pizza at his window, and they're here to hang out like they said. As such, while Steven's slightly reluctant, he does eventually agree, and the next scene is Steven in the fish stew pizza delivery car with Jenny driving and Buck and Sour Cream in the back seat. As such, they're all pretty much just talking about all their respective situations. How Jenny's talking about how she and her sister have a bit of a complicated relationship because her sister Kiki is the good twin and Jenny's the evil one, so she shouldn't be bothered to help her out. Sour Cream's talking about how his stepdad keeps bugging him to fish, and it's kind of implied via dialogue that his stepdad is actually Onion's dad, so I'll get back to that in a later episode. And even Buck is talking about how his dad keeps trying to push him into being a better kid because his dad is the mayor's son, so he should be a better example and all that crap. But as they're all talking about family drama, Steven starts bringing up his, especially with the current revelations that he learned 2 episodes ago about how he might be his mom, how he learned the crystal gems are actually alien rebels, that there's an entire planet of other gems who want to see them dead because they're traitors to their home world. Which actually shakes the teens so bad they actually all go silent. And what makes it better is that they're listening to music through all this, and then after they all take a moment to register what Steven said, Jenny turns off the radio and just says, "Wow, that was deep." Which I'll give credit where it's due. I actually like how the cool kids are handled in the show. Yeah, they're still written like average dumb teenagers, but they do usually understand Steven's plight. In this case, when they hear what happened to Steven, they don't brush it off. They actually realize, holy shit, you're dealing with some stuff there, kid. And they actually do try to sympathize, even saying, "Yeah, I'd deal with all my crap if I didn't have to deal with any of yours." It's nice, and they actually are being sympathetic to Steven's plight. However, in the middle of their conversation, Sour Cream tells Jenny to stop the car because he sees something. As they were driving, they were passing by a cornfield, and from the cornfield they see a green light. Steven and the teens go to investigate, and sure enough, the source of the green light is Peridot's escape pod, which I actually like how it landed, because when it landed, it created like a diamond-shaped crater. As such, when Steven realizes what it is, he tries to tell... Excuse me one second. Sorry about that puppo thing, and there's probably going to be another interruption later. I just let her out in front, so I'll put your heads up in advance. But anyway, as I said, when Steven realizes what the thing is, he tries to move the teens away from them, but them being dumb teens, they don't want to get in closer and start seeing what it is. Steven tries to explain that this is Peridot's escape pod, but they have no idea who the hell Peridot is, which makes sense. He never mentioned Peridot before this. And so he tries to get them away because this is gem technology. He should go and get the crystal gem so they can take care of it. But the teens just immediately start wanting to take selfies with it, which Steven almost doesn't take part in. But Jenny tempts him with stickers, so immediately he starts posing for some of the selfies, and it's clear they're having a good time. It's cute, it's fun, it's nice, but But eventually, for the selfies, Jenny talks Steven into going into the pod, which Steven almost doesn't do, but he decides what the hell and goes in. And upon going inside, the pod seems to activate. And from inside it, Steven's able to control it, get it to move around, walk around, and just goof around with it. As such, Steven does things is really cool, and he enjoys it. And while he still thinks that maybe he should take this back to the gems, the teens end up talking him into goofing around with it and still having more fun. And so he and the teens just start playing around and just being typical teenagers with it. As such, Steven is having a fun time, just kind of enjoying himself and so forth. But, however, unfortunately though, in the midst of their funs, after Steven tries jumping over a bay of hair, a stack of hay, the pod ends up falling on its face, quote unquote, and Steven says it's okay. It just used a little oomph, and he ends up hitting a button. He ends up hitting something on the pod, or in this case, he ends up hitting a dent. And the thing is, throughout this whole time, a piece of the pod's front glass or front visor seemed to be kind of stuck. It just kind of moved to the side. Well, when Steven punched that little dent, it moved enough of it out of the way so that for it to fully cover the pod. And immediately when it covered the pod, it goes into attack mode, and Steven loses all control. And unfortunately, he's still stuck inside, as immediately the pod starts flying up and shooting lasers all over the immediate area, which causes the teens to scatter and run. In the meantime, Steven is still stuck inside, and his control is sadly limited, even to the point, and which is made even worse when the pod starts filling up with that weird goop that the Paradox Robinoids had that repaired stuff. And while Steven can breathe in it for the most part, he still can't control anything, and in the midst of his struggling to do it, he accidentally launches a flare from the escape pod, which ends up shooting this diamond-shaped firework into the sky, which gets the attention of the Crystal Gems, who come running, and upon arriving at the scene, they see the escape pod and think that it's Peridot because they can't get a good look inside. As such, they decide that Peridot's clearly just causing mayhem. Let's just go wreck the thing. As such, Steven is inside, and unfortunately, as when he sees the gems coming, and he sees them going all out, he tries saying, "No, it's me in here, it's me," but they can't hear him, and sadly enough, the gems do enough damage to the pod, they manage to get it in place, and Garnet ends up pulling it in and making a speech how she doesn't know why Peridot came here, but she's not going to cause any more damage on this planet, and she's going to send her packing, and she even gets a gauntlet ready to deliver the coup de grace. Before she can do that, Jenny ends up getting in the way and which causes Garnet to freeze, which Jenny telling him, "No, Steven's in there." As such, Garnet finally gets a good look inside the pod, and sure enough, she sees Steven kind of huddled up and clearly afraid. As such, Garnet ends up calming down, grabs the pod, and breaks it open like an egg, and so Steven comes barreling out. As such, the gems end up getting on Steven's case because this thing is important, that he should have come to them immediately, and even Garnet admits that she's disappointed in Steven. But the teens immediately jump to Steven's defense because while they don't fully understand what he's going through, they at least know enough that it's probably some heavy stuff, and they think that maybe he deserves a break every once in a while. Which I'll get to my thoughts on that when I get to my thoughts on the episode. But pretty much the summation of their arguments is that he's done a lot for that. He's done a lot. He deserves some off time and some goofing off, so they shouldn't be blaming him for messing around with this thing. So the gems do admit that Steven if it wasn't for Steven, they would probably be still stuck in space jail, and maybe he could use a break. And so to try and alleviate it, Garnet ends up undoing Steven's grounding, so now he can watch TV again. As such, to celebrate, the episode ends with everybody taking more selfies to the pod, and Sour Cream throwing a rock on the pod for Earth. So, okay, first let's talk about my thoughts on Full Disclosure. As a follow-up to the return and jailbreak, I think it does well in carrying the mood that those episodes had. In this case, it does well in showcasing how it affects our main characters, specifically Steven. With the gems, their reactions are kind of underwhelming, which in a way kind of makes sense. In the case of Pearl and Garnet, they've dealt with this kind of shit before, and probably on a larger scale in the case of the war. And Amethyst, while she has not dealt with this before, she's at least fought enough battles to at least get used to it, and we know her as the fun-loving scamp. But Steven, excuse me one second. Again, sorry about that. Again, like I mentioned, puppy. But like I said, going back to Steven, one of the aspects of Steven's character that we've seen up to this point in the series is how he typically takes everything. For Steven, up until this point, he saw the gems' mission as very black and white. They're the good guys, and they're protecting people from monsters, or in the case of Lapis Lazuli, the bad guys. They're usually the superheroes. They're the monsters. And there are monsters out there. Up to this point, his mission was very black and white, and he felt that they were very much well prepared for it and could easily handle it. But last week's two-parter was his Saturday morning wake-up call that made him finally start to realize just how heavy things were. Now, even when he started to realize the severity of what they were going through, at the same time, it still felt like Tuesday for him in a way. Case in point, let me go back to talking about Jailbreak. Throughout that episode, while Steven started to fully kind of comprehend just how serious things were, he also still treated it like it was just the gems doing their typical thing. Yeah, they were dealing with an enemy that was stronger than them, but it was still a typical mission. They were still doing everything. When he got victories, he was like, "Woo! What victory for Steven!" Or when he was talking with everyone, when he was talking with friends or people he perceived as allies, he was still very social, very nice, very much matter of fact, very much just regular, helpful Steven. And as such, when this episode rolls around and he gets to start talking about everything, yeah, he talks about how they almost got steamrolled, but at the same time, he treats it like it's just a normal everyday thing, which kind of makes sense. Odds are that Steven's been exposed to quite a bit of this stuff since he was younger. So even though he knows this is probably a heavier thing than normal, at the same time, he's like, well, we still won in the end, so I can still talk about it, right? Well, not the case. When he actually tells this stuff, everything that happened to his dad, and he sees his dad freaking out, it starts hitting him just how messed up that this whole thing is. Like on top, like he not only has to deal with all the ramifications of about learning about what the crystal gems really are, and just how big of a cliff they have to climb in order to protect the Earth. But at the same time, he also has to realize how normal people react to that, and as a result, what he might have to give up in order to continue living this life. And it starts kind of making him realize this is a lot heavier than I thought. Sorry about that again, Soda. So what I love is that it's first exemplified when he talks to his dad. Like when Connie calls, Steven was fully prepared to just lay it all out to her. Just tell her, "Hey Connie, guess what? We fought this big bad evil guy. They wiped the floor with us. She kicked our asses, knocked me out, and we only barely got by the skin of our teeth. Cause again, they survived, so he can talk about it. They're the crystal gems. They deal with dangerous shit all the time." But when he sees how normal people react to this, and how many of them are actually shaken by it, his reaction, he starts to realize maybe this isn't maybe this is bigger than I actually think it is. And when he starts realizing that, he starts realizing just how bad it is. Like, yeah, it already did kind of shake him up a little. He already did, as we see in the next episode, in Joyride, the revelations here do shake him up a bit, but he also has to realize that, but this episode, when he sees how people react to him sharing the news, it also makes him realize that just how heavy things are. That this isn't just a regular, average thing. This is a lot bigger than he thinks it is, and you can start to see the pressure start getting to him a little. Especially after his dad freaks out. After his dad freaks out, he tries to think of ways to break the news to Connie, as he keeps calling, and he keeps trying to think of different ways to tell the story that won't make her freak out. And when he starts realizing maybe she won't, maybe there is no nice way, maybe I should just not tell her, it starts hitting him harder because at this point he's like, at this point he's starting to realize that doing all this might ensure that he might not have any time for a social life. He may not have time for friends and so forth, because if they were exposed to all of this, then sadly they may not take it very well, and it could end up emotionally damaging them, and he doesn't want that. He cares about them too much. Hold on one second. Again, puppy stuff. But as I mentioned, but as I mentioned, what this ep- but as I mentioned, as Steven starts kind of realizing just how heavy things really are, that's when it starts kind of hitting him a bit more just how much this is, just how big this really is, and that does start to have an effect on him emotionally, and it's exemplified in the song in the episode's song as he sings about that everybody told him that gem stuff is dangerous, but I get it wasn't until now that he never really believed them. And so when he finally realizes just the full implications of what they do and what it means to do it, yeah, you can tell that it's starting to have an effect on Steven, which is exemplified when he tries closing himself off and shutting out Connie, but the more Connie keeps pushing and wants to be let in, the more Steven's facade starts to break, and he just opens up to her. But at the same, which I think as well, as it finally allows Steven to talk about it and get it off his chest. And as he talks about it with Connie, well, it's clear that the conversation actually does make him feel better. Yeah, he's worried about her, but what makes it, I think, nicer is that Connie is clearly trying to understand him. Sorry, Chindy's walking around. And so, and so, it actually makes everything feel better. Like, yeah, there's still all that weight, but what makes stuff like that feel better is that even if you have the full weight of the world on your shoulders, when you have someone to share it with, hold on a sec. Again, Chindy was messing with stuff. But anyway, like I said, even if you have the full weight of the world on your shoulders, if there's someone there that can help you carry it, it won't always feel as heavy. And that's what it feels like at the end of the episode. As it's a nice way, as Steven does end up talking to Connie, and while it clearly, and the news does shake her up a bit, at the same time, she also realizes that Steven's probably the one that's the most shaken up because, this stuff sounds heavy, but he lived through it. And at the end of the day, even if it means that her life might be on the line, she still wants to be there for Steven and be a part of his world, which ultimately I think is really sweet, as it does well in further strengthening their relationship, and ultimately is a nice way of helping Steven get through things, which I think is I think is a good thing, especially with everything that happened in the previous episodes. So I like that. It's a nice way of setting of kind of bringing everything to a close, kind of giving Steven some idea of just the full weight of what this path that he's chosen entails. But that in the end, even if but in the end, even if there are still a lot of in the end, despite how heavy things are going to get, he still has people there that are willing to help him carry the weight, which is exemplified further when Greg comes by and says he's calmed down, though I think he's calmed down a little too well. I think he should still be a little shaken. But at the same time, it's nice that he still wants to be there for Steven and wants to be supportive. So again, I genuinely like that. I do like that, and I think, and with Steven's reaction and how things ultimately do settle down, it does feel like a nice little cap on how things went in last week's two-parter. So yeah, overall, still good. Definitely has enough heavy emotion, but also does well and kind of bringing everything to a nice smooth close. So there you go. But then you get to Joyride. This episode also does well in having it be a follow-up because it also deals with Steven's emotional state, but I would argue it doesn't do it as well. In this case, it all really comes down to the teen's message, so to speak, because they talk about how Steven has like I said, one of the things that I do like is how while the teens are written like typical teens, they aren't like typical jackasses. They will complain about their parents keeping them down or them not being able to pursue the career basically the paths that they want to pursue. But at the same time, they do when Steven pretty much drops all the heavy shit he's been through. They act a similar way. They act kind of in a similar fashion to Greg and Connie, but they are sympathetic and realize, holy shit, that's deep. I'm sorry you're going through that. So I do like that, and I get in a way part of them realizing that does explain why they're pushing Steven to go along with them, to have fun, to mess around with Peridot's pot, and to be fair, they're not entirely wrong when they talk about Steven needing a break, because even if they don't fully understand what's going on, they realize that Steven's been through a lot of shit, and that maybe he could use some him time. He should have some time to unwind, to relax, to goof off, because if he doesn't have that, if he deals with all this shit by himself, then there's a chance he could break. So there are some times that he needs to have some fun and just goof around and forget about all the heavy shit. Just be a kid. Which, you know what? I agree. I think that that's true. With everything that we saw in the return and jailbreak, of course Steven should have some time to unwind. Yeah, unloading. Yes, yeah. Sometimes having someone to talk to is good, but sometimes you do need to distract yourself and get your mind off things, because if that's not because if that all that shit is on your mind 24/7, it can ultimately leave you scarred a little. So I do agree somewhat with the teens about their message. The problem is the circumstances that the problem is how they implement it, and in the context of which they give the message. In this case, Peridot's pod. Pretty much, while I do like that Steven is forward thinking, and I do like that when he sees the pod, his first instinct is to call the gems, because honestly, that is the responsible thing to do. The problem, however, is that the teenagers are written like dumbass teenagers, and as a result of this, even when Steven tries continually doing the responsible thing, they keep saying, no, goof around with that, have fun, just go nuts with it, and it's just dumb. I honestly agree with the gems when they choose Steven out for not immediately telling them that he found Peridot's pod, because this thing is dangerous. And you want to know something? That gets proven right before they chewed Steven out, because as he was goofing around with the thing, he accidentally turned it into assault mode and it nearly killed the teenagers. And the gems nearly killed Steven because they thought he was Peridot. So yes, I am gonna say that Steven acted stupidly here. Again, there's nothing wrong with having fun, and I'll give credit where it's due. It is kind of nice to see Steven and the teens goofing off a little. I can forgive them for possibly taking the selfies, but for continuously messing around with the pod, even when they know they should be giving it to someone who probably knows more about this shit than they do, they still keep going at it. And every time Steven suggests, maybe I should bring this back to the gems, the teens are like, no, keep having fun, and it's just dumb. Like, again, I know they're dumbass teenagers, and like I said, they're not technically wrong with their message. It's just that this is one of those circumstances where the message should probably not be applied. Yes, Steven should have off time. Steven should just be able to goof around and be a kid. But when you're dealing with dangerous alien technology that you barely understand, maybe, just maybe, you should tell someone who does understand. And in this case, because they were goofing around with the alien technology, like I said, they almost died. Steven almost died. They almost died. This group of kids almost were killed because they wanted to have fun. And like I said, nothing wrong with that. It's just that it's time and place. Time and place. And this was neither the time nor the place. If they wanted to have fun, there were various other ways they could do it. They're taking Steven out to just goof off. You know what? That's nice. That is nice of them to do. I like that they actually respected Steven's job enough that they came back later when everything was done to hang out with him. But even when Steven tries telling them, no, this is serious, we need to take this away, they keep pushing him. And as a result, it does kind of sour the episode a little for me. Not entirely, because like I said, there are still parts of it that I do like. Seeing Steven goofing around the teens is admittedly nice, at least for a little bit. Seeing them still deal with the aftermath of the ship crashing is nice. And like I said, while the teenagers are written like dumbass teenagers, I do like that they are sympathetic to Steven's plight. It's just that at the same time, when the central message of your episode, which admittedly is a good one, has the context of them being idiot teenagers and doing stupid things, it kind of dampens it a little. And ultimately, well, it is kind of nice that that the gems still relent enough and say, you know what, Steven, you're ungrounded from TV. At the same time, that doesn't really feel like where things should have gone. It really does feel like that Steven should have at least been chewed out a little. That he did somewhat deserve it. He did what he did, well, which was childish. And yeah, he's 13 years old, but at the very least, dangerous alien technology. I'm still going to give him crap for that. So at the very least, while there is still enough about the episode for me to like it, I can't say that it's good either. At best, I'm just going to say it's alright. It's just alright. The first episode was good because it dealt with the emotional aftermath and showcased Steven kind of dealing with the shell shock of everything he went through, while also trying to come to terms with what the job really means and if he wants to include Connie in that part of his life. And this episode, it does well. And like I said, the message is nice. Steven does need to have some off time, but otherwise, it really needed to be wrapped in different packaging for it to work. So overall, one episode I think is good, one is just all right. They're just one's better, one's clearly a lot better than the other. Don't hate either of them, but Joyride's definitely the weaker of the two. So yeah, I think that's really all I'd say about the episode. Although there is one more thing I should probably mention that I forgot to talk about in the last episode: Garnet's new design. Because like with Pearl before her, when she got poofed, when she reformed after she got poofed, her design changed, and it's all right. From a glance, you probably wouldn't be able to tell it's a different design, but it is. But there are some changes. Like her hair isn't as big as it was before. Her shoulder pads look a bit smaller, more triangular, and the colors on her outfit are very much different. With the star pattern now being different shades of being different shades of pink instead of like the red, pink, and black that it was before. And so, yeah, it's a somewhat more condensed design with a different color palette, which ultimately I like. It's fine, but unless you're actually paying attention, you probably wouldn't notice any difference between it and the original design. So yeah, overall it's all right, a little bit better, but only really for the color palette. Otherwise, it's very similar to the last one, so you probably wouldn't notice anything different unless you're looking. So yeah, I think that's really all I have to say. Thank you for watching. I'm Samuel Johnson, and tune in next week when we finally start Season 2 of Steven Universe and look at a very weird episode. You'll see when we get to it. So till then, I hope you have a good night, and I hope you have a good night, and well, I hope you enjoy yourselves. Take care.